Mark Toscano from Los Angeles Filmforum and James Wilkins. Okay. Hi.
Hey, thanks for sticking around.
So there's obviously a lot to potentially talk about here. These are really rich works, but I'm wondering, just as a way to start, you made special features first, but was there at that point already this idea it was going to be maybe this multi-part series of films that had some sort of connective tissue between them?
No. And just before I get into it, I will say, I forgot to mention that I know you have a handout, but that there weren't titles. So the first one was called Special Features. The second was Tester. And the third, B-roll with Andre. And I made special features first, independently. I had no idea that it was going to become these other two films. It was kind of like a self-enclosed experiment in response to a residency situation I was doing. And also equipment that I had access to. Someone gave me a mini TV camera that Comedy Central had thrown out, and so I decided to write a piece around this camera as an object, I guess. Yeah.
Well, and then in a way the same thing happens in Tester, although in that case you weren't like looking for this material. I mean, it sort of found you, right?
Right, yeah. So, yeah, after Special Features screened and I realized that this, it was kind of working, you know, and like the sort of like Andre thread was something that I wanted to follow up on. I was actually working on a totally separate film that involved beta SP decks, and I ordered a deck off of eBay, and the tape that Tester is made from was inside the deck, and I decided that I made a promise to a friend that I would turn it into a film somehow, some way, and yeah.
Well, and then in the third film, we have this stock footage of the menacing thug.
Right,
which
right.
Did you, and was that something you looked for or you came across? Or, I mean, like, I guess I'm kind of getting at this idea of like stumbling upon material that has some anonymous qualities in a way.
Right. Yeah, so in B-roll with Andre, I guess the genesis or the pivot, I guess, of the film is this piece of stock footage. So I'm not sure if I actually know that it's not like 100% clear when you watch B-roll with Andre. It's kind of on purpose. The hooded figure is stock footage that I purchased. It's like a 30-second loop in full HD that I bought for $40. And the GoPro footage is original footage. And so I was trying to sort of like reverse, I guess, like what is typically B-roll and what is typically A-roll. So like the subject, I guess, is actually just stock, you know. And yeah, I stumbled across this footage online when sort of looking up random query like search terms, and it was called Mysterious Threatening Thug and .mp4 or something like that. And I was sort of interested in why, like, you know, it was titled this, and so the sort of implicit sort of like racism and how it came out around the time of like Trayvon Martin's, a little after Trayvon Martin's shooting, and like the sort of monetization of this kind of imagery. But it was totally something I found through just sort of internet exploration, I guess. Sort of a piece of like debris, I guess, as much as a tape or a camera thrown out by Comedy Central. Yeah.
Well, I noticed that last year, I was looking at the website that you got that from, and I noticed there's also like an off-center version.
Oh,
so
yeah.
There's like a forward center version and an off-center version, depending on
what you blow out the
on.
guy's face, yeah. like you reduce the contrast or whatever. It's actually just like this like pimply like white kid that's like which I think is that's sort of that's another movie or something. But like yeah, so he was like definitely creating like all these like sort of versions that could and you know, I don't blame him too. You know, we all need to make money.
Well, and so one thread that I think is really interesting in all three of these is this notion, well, two things actually that really I'm fascinated with and have been since I first saw these works was this thread of working with notions of anonymous material and like how it can be invested with with an identity maybe, but just how open that is and how you approach that. But then on top of that, you have this idea of authenticity too, and how we communicate authenticity and how the media itself, meaning the equipment and the formats, et cetera, play a role in that. And I mean, and I feel like obviously you're engaging a lot with the technology, and I mean, there's a lot of references to it. It's very self-aware in that way. And I'm wondering those two ideas of like anonymity and authenticity, and like wrapped up with the media itself and the technology. I mean, it's something that comes up also in other works of yours too. Like, what is that thread for you, and like how is that a recurring fascination, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very like dense question,
Yes,
but good. I guess like it's sort of like I'm realizing, and I have realized, or having made work since too, that sort of forcing my voice, me, James's voice, like through like these sort of like proxies or whatever, is something that just really interests me, you know, and like using like almost like a medium or something, like someone else's like form, to like communicate this like further thing. Yeah, I mean, like, so like a little bit of the backstory with special features, which I don't think is like central to like the interpretation of the work. Like, I'm happy for it to be understood, like just sort of flat, superficially, for what it is, what it looks like. But the actors are reading from a teleprompter. Those are sort of two things that are kind of embedded, I guess, in it for me just to begin working, or were embedded for me to begin working. One is that they are recounting a dream that I actually had. And I was initially interested in just the setup of like someone telling me my own dream, and then it turning into something else, obviously. And the second thing is that they're reading from a teleprompter, so it was 3 takes of 3 different men reading a timed script, you know, that I wrote.
Were they reading it cold too?
They were reading it cold, yeah. And so they were like, you know, I didn't really care so much about like whether or not they were like acting properly, you know, like I hired them to perform, and so I paid them, and they were going to perform, and each of them had a sort of different understanding of what performance means. Like one of them was like a professional actor, one was a guy who was about to stop acting, and one was just a guy who needed money off of Craigslist, who actually asked later if he could just like be my PA afterwards, because he just needed cash. Yeah, so, yeah, so the kind of like lapses and jags in like their performance is its relationship to like my voice was something I really wanted to like bring out. Yeah.
Well, and also, I mean, besides all the specific references to specific technology in all 3, there are, like, particularly in Tester, there's so many very, very deliberate references to particular pop cultural, I don't know, whether it's like restaurants or, you know, Zappos.com and stuff like that. And that foregrounding of that, it seems like, and in B-roll with Andre, where you have the kind of Panera callback there, this idea of like fixing the works very much in time seems to me like something you're interested in. Like, and what that, I mean, why is that? I'm just curious.
Fixing it in time.
Yeah.
As
like, not just time, but in a culture, in a time, and maybe in like a class even.
I don't know why. That's interesting. I guess I think that's why I make movies. I mean, that's why I think it's important to like really like just chronicle like now, you know, like I don't know, maybe I just am stuck in now or something. Like I'm not universal or something. But yeah,
well, it's kind of like fixing the ephemeral, like in a concrete way too.
Yeah, you know, and so the imagery in Tester, for instance, like it wasn't just like, oh, it's a joke. Like I just want to turn this into a movie. Like there was something really fascinating to me about that material forensically. You know, it's like a beta SP tape that's ostensibly from an audiovisual house in Culver City that, you know, shipped to me the deck off of eBay through eBay, and you can't, like, it looks like it's one moment, but it's really many moments because they've recorded over and then rewound, and it's sort of like scraping the tape. It's like this sort of palimpsest or something, and so it's like many times at once, probably only within like a 3-year period, if that. And so just that sort of ambiguity, looking at it, yeah, like forensically, and trying to just kind of like really trying to like fix it into something that is comprehensible. Yeah, it's like, was to me like the point of like making is the point of like making movies or narratives or whatever, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, and that suggested a detective narrative for you?
Wait, is that, sorry?
The tester material sort of suggested a directive?
Maybe the act of making is also, like, I actually think that being a filmmaker is very similar to being like a private eye, like, definitely. Yeah.
Are there any questions from the audience? You might have to yell them out if you're in the back. And it's a little bright too. Yes.
I have a question about sincerity, but I don't know exactly what it is. I think maybe it's about truth. I'm trying to figure out if the truth of the image or the sincerity of the work is at the base, or if it's the thing you're moving away from, or the thing that you're moving towards.
I'm not sure if I'm concerned with sincerity.
Yeah. Okay. Can you talk about, because you have like the images all begin from like a found source, and then there's a narrative that's put on top of them. And so in a way, like the document is there in service to the fiction, but not always. Totally. So I'm just wondering, like how you, like what it's moving towards or what it's moving away from.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that's so kind of like ethics or something of like, I mean, I don't.
Emotion, not so much ethics.
I don't feel like that I necessarily owe the material anything. I'm actually really, one thing that I think special features and tester, and I guess B-roll too, like each of the source materials, if you were to consider like the actors and special features like a source material, you know, or a material, you know, if we were to dare to say that like a human is a material, in terms of, in the sense that they were hired to do something. Yeah, it's kind of like what I can, like once I engage in like a sort of financial transaction, like then what am I allowed to get away with, you know, or do? Or how much can I impose my imagination upon this thing? And I'm not sure if I'm answering your question about sincerity or where sincerity plays a role in that, but I like thinking about it on that sort of like level of, that sort of transactional level, you know? Not that that's like an excuse for anything, but it's just sort of like a way of like structuring like just these experiments, you know?
Well, like in a way, testing the boundaries of the transaction and what it allows you to do.
Yeah, and to see where it goes emotionally. Yeah, and if, like, say, a tape can become something different than what it is, or what we, just what it is, different than what it is. Does that make sense?
Well, and related to that, I'm thinking about an earlier film of yours, Public Hearing, where you took a publicly available transcript of a meeting.
Right, exactly, which I have a legal right to as a citizen of, you know, New York State, to access, because it's publicly archived material, archived for you and for me, and chose to impose my directorial will, I guess, upon it and turn it into a film shot in 60mm, cinematize it basically, and fill in the gaps that were absent in a transcript, which is just what's heard, you know. So, yeah, I mean, there are definitely ethical issues, but I think that that's a puddle that I like to, you know, step in,
splash around in.
Splash around. Yeah. It might not be the deepest puddle in the world, but it's a puddle nonetheless. Yeah.
Well, it's also touching on the notion of the ready-made too. I mean, in all three pieces, I think even in special features, I mean, to me, in some ways, your dream is this sort of automatic literary material that you're just drawing on, not just the actors as material, like you were saying, but I mean, the dream itself, it's this sort of automatic thing that you did have to write down, obviously, but
Right.
it's sort of like story by question mark, screenplay by James and Kienitz Wilkins.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
Any other questions?
Do the rental house tax never use the footage?
Well, they do in the sense that they sold it to me. And it's in Culver City, I think. So you guys can, if you know the guys. I was hoping they'd show up, but yeah, I mean, that's a good question because like, it's similarly with public hearing. Like I reached out to some of the people who are in the film, who are, there's actors playing the real people who attended the public hearing, but by attending the public hearing, you essentially enter into a contract that your likeness, I guess, it is now in the public domain. So it's like, they're not exactly playing the people, they're playing like their legal likeness, I guess you could say, and so it's unclear necessarily whether or not there's like emotionally, like where do you really want to get into it, and like what kind of rights do we have, in these cases, and what kind of harm is actually happening too. I don't think actually that much personally, but yeah, and there's a reason like Tester is playing here in this context and not like being distributed by Amazon Studios or whatever. Like it would never, the mere presence of the tape hijacks like it's like marketability or whatever, or saleability, I guess. And so there's kind of this like quid pro quo thing happening anyways, that I'm fine with, I guess, or I don't know.
And, yeah, Bob.
I was wondering if you had been a fan or listened to the radio work of Joe Frank, because I was having major
Joe Frank tremors,
flashbacks. Listening to this because always with Joe, you're aware of the writing. And,
I can answer that.
And the tone, the vocal tone.
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
is there.
Actually, okay, so I'm just, thank you. I just discovered Joe Frank, actually, because he died recently. And yeah, I really, I loved, I'm really into him now. But it's strange, like I didn't know of him before.
Wow.
But I do really believe in like this idea of like, I've been thinking about this idea of like retroactive inspirations, where you can like be inspired by a work that you've never seen because it's like entered into the ether or whatever, ether. And you're just, because we're all connected and part of culture, like it just works out that way, and then you discover work and you're like, oh, like I should have seen this before I made this film, but it's cool because it's like meant to be. And I feel very similarly about, actually, I don't want to bore you talking about more films that haven't shown tonight, but my film Indefinite Pitch, I really feel an affinity to Morgan Fisher's Standard Gauge, and which I saw after I made Indefinite Pitch, and like I think they pair really well together. I think they communicate, and I would call it like a retroactive inspiration. So maybe Joe Frank too, yeah, in this case.
Anybody else? Oh, in the very back, I think, right? You're in the shadow.
Yeah, sorry. I really don't know how to
There's some menacing thug back there.
So I noticed like there was a big theme of sort of, I guess, almost like criticizing objective reality. Like it was talking about Plato. Made me think of Socrates' Allegory of the Cave, and also talking about like the 2K, 4K high resolution. And I feel like all the stories were this narrative that we weren't actually seeing. It was just told to us. So, yeah, what was your thoughts with that? And also, like at the end, you were kind of had this blur pixelation of the video. I don't know. If you explain what your thought process was with all that.
So not seeing, and then the blur pixelation. Well, starting with the blur pixelation, that was, I guess this is like hard to prove, and you have to take my word for it. But that GoPro malfunctioned at that very moment, and that was like a corrupted file that I had to extract and save. So that like picks, like the GoPro, like a spirit entered it or something. Like it wanted to like be that, and so it's like, you know, that's the footage. Like, it just self-combusted, I guess, because it was very in close proximity to like better cameras or something. And in terms of like the no image thing, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I just made a movie that has no image. I mean, it's called The Republic, and it's just a fade from black to white and like CinemaScope, and yeah, I guess that's where I'm going.
Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Talking more about the GoPro footage at the video conference or whatever it was, were you kind of like role playing Andre as a cinematographer, really like 100%, or were you kind of just being a person at that video conference and just getting your footage and kind of leaving? How much were you acting?
Now you're getting to the secrets.
This is Los Angeles, baby.
I mean, like, do you want me to say I was role playing? Yeah, maybe I was. Yeah, I mean, you know, like that. I will say that like that footage, for me, always was like the B-roll was always supposed to be the original footage. You know, like the footage that was collected in order to respond to this sort of story or whatever I was creating, and the A-roll is, you know, the hoodie footage is kind of irrelevant. And so I guess in that case, yes, you know, like the suggestion that it's Andre or Andre is maybe somehow aligned with the author, I guess. You know, I'll admit it. Yeah.
Any, shall we say, final questions? All right, well, I want to thank you so much for finally making it to LA for screening, and
thank you so much
for sharing the Andre trilogy. We have plenty more to catch up on with you too, so
yeah,
we'll do that.
for sure.
All right, thank you everybody for coming.
Thanks.